Now that we've talked about some of the events in Jesus' life, let's talk about what he actually preached. And the main focus of Jesus' preaching was what he called the kingdom of God. Now, your book highlights these 5 aspects of the kingdom of God. Number 1, that God's kingdom is here on this earth, not just in heaven, that it exists in part here as part of our own world. Number 2, God is a loving Father. Jesus addressed God as Father, and because we imitate Jesus, we can as well. Number 3, Jesus taught that God is merciful, that one aspect of the kingdom of God is God's incredible mercy. Number 4, Jesus is present in his church. That means that in part we can experience the kingdom of God and Jesus through the church. And number 5, and this is a difficult aspect of the kingdom of God, to accept Jesus is to accept the cross. What is the kingdom of God, though? I encourage you to look up a couple of scriptures that talk more about the kingdom of God. The story of the prodigal son from the Gospel of Luke, or the story of how Jesus healed on the Sabbath from the Gospel of Mark. These 2 stories speak to what Jesus thought of the kingdom of God. If you read these stories, you may notice some of these characteristics. Number 1, all that is lost will be restored. In the kingdom of God, even that which seems impossible to be restored will be restored. Number 2, the first shall be last, and the last shall be first. Those who are the least in society, like the shepherds in Jesus' time, or maybe the homeless in our own time, are the first in the kingdom of God. This is good news for the poor, of course, because in the kingdom of God, God is the ultimate judge and authority, not our human society which looks down on people like the homeless. Now, Jesus preached the kingdom of God. He talked about the kingdom of God, but people also experienced the kingdom of God through Jesus. The church teaches that Jesus is the kingdom of God in person. That's why we experience the kingdom of God through the church, because Jesus is present in his church and Jesus is the kingdom of God in person. This explains in part the miracles. The way I understand miracles is this, that people experienced God's kingdom in Jesus' presence. For example, they experienced healing and restoration and justice. To me, that's the meaning of the miracles that Jesus worked. Let's talk for a moment now about that difficult 5th point the book brings out about the kingdom of God, that to accept Jesus is to accept the cross. Why is that so? Well, the kingdom of God comes into conflict with the ways of the world. Our world, for example, judges homeless people, where in the kingdom of God, the homeless, the poor, the impoverished are the very first in the kingdom. So being true to the gospel, being true to this good news, may lead to painful decisions or even persecution. Here are some examples. Think of the sacrifices that your parents make for you to go to this school, or just in general for you to have a good education, for you to thrive, for you to do well. Or think of your friends or peers maybe making fun of you because you choose to stand up for somebody who is, in our school's society, one of the least, but in the kingdom of God, one of the greatest. I want to emphasize, however, that accepting the cross does not mean putting up with abuse. Unfortunately, this perversion of Christian teaching that it does mean putting up with abuse has had a very great influence in the church and in our world. Accepting the cross is not about accepting abuse. And if you yourself have experienced abuse or are experiencing abuse in your life right now, I encourage you to visit the following website, www.thehotline.org, so that you can find help. February is National Teen Dating Violence Awareness and Prevention Month, and no one should have to put up with abuse.